Before we get into this, viewer discretion is advised. What you're about to hear is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is a courtroom testimony reported by Inner City Press, and it shocked everyone. Nobody expected what happened next. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, global superstar, former wrestling icon, box office king, stepped into the courtroom. But this wasn't the Dwayne the world knows. This wasn't the grinning guy lighting up red carpets or raising eyebrows in the ring. This was a man who looked broken, vulnerable, terrified. He wasn't there to promote a film or make a statement. He was there to confess, and what he shared sent an instant chill through the room. Dwayne spoke of disturbing initiations that happened during his early rise to fame, rituals no one could have imagined, and he claimed the man behind it all was Sean "Diddy" Combs. The entire court froze. Dwayne's face wasn't confident anymore. It was hollow. That signature eyebrow? It was tense, but not in strength. In pain. Even Diddy's legal team looked thrown off. His lawyers whispered, rapidly, clearly blindsided. Prosecutors exchanged silent glances. No one had warned the press. No leaks, no whispers, no clues that this was coming, that he was coming. And yet, there he was. Dwayne hesitated before sitting down. He gripped the railing, looked at the judge, and quietly asked, "May I say something first?" The judge nodded. What followed next changed everything. He turned to the jury, to the gallery, and finally to Diddy himself. "I don't want to be here," he said, his voice low and shaking, "but I have to be. I've lived with this for almost 20 years, and yeah, I'm still scared, but I'm even more scared of what happens if I stay silent." The courtroom went completely still. Dwayne was sworn in and finally sat down, his voice barely above a whisper. "You all know me as The Rock, the guy who never breaks. But I'm about to break now, and I need everyone here to understand what I'm about to say isn't just about Diddy. It's about how he got away with it for so long." His lips trembled as he admitted it. "I was one of them. I played along. I did what I had to do to survive. And I paid a price no one saw." The entire room leaned forward, because what Dwayne was about to describe wasn't just humiliating, it was horrifying. A Hollywood initiation that would make headlines for years. He took a breath. It was 2001. I'd just made the jump from wrestling to movies. The Scorpion King was fresh. I was hungry, ambitious, but I was also naive. That's when Diddy appeared. Dwayne described Diddy as this all-powerful connector, someone who could open every door in Hollywood. When Diddy told him, "Let's talk off the record," he assumed it was just business. That's when the invites started. Private events, industry nights, glamorous low-key get-togethers in Diddy's mansions, from LA to Miami. At first, it all felt normal, classy even. Champagne, producers, casting agents, everyone around him said Diddy's the guy. But slowly, the vibe changed. It stopped feeling like networking, Dwayne said. It started feeling like a test. Diddy began asking questions like, "Would you bleed for greatness?" Dwayne thought he was joking, but Diddy never smiled. Then came the favors, the strange party times. One night, Dwayne was told to show up at 2:13 a.m. to a house in Bel Air. Diddy told him that was when real decisions are made. He showed up. No one was there for an hour, and then they arrived, a group of silent men in black suits. No introductions, no talking, just waiting for Diddy. When he finally entered, he dimmed the lights and played this audio loop from hidden speakers. It was Diddy's own voice. "Are you worthy? Are you ready? Would you eat what I feed you?" Dwayne said at first. He assumed it was some weird art piece, just another eccentric Hollywood flex. But something in his gut screamed, "This isn't right." And then came the first real test. Diddy asked Dwayne to meet him privately at an undisclosed location outside Los Angeles. Dwayne hesitated, but his publicist told him, "This could be the meeting that changes your life." Turns out it did. Just not in the way he ever expected. Dwayne looked straight at the jury. "This is the part I've never told anyone," he said. "Not my wife, not my friends, not even my therapist." He described how he was blindfolded, driven to a remote estate. When he asked the driver where they were going, the guy just turned up the music. Once they arrived, two men escorted Dwayne into a candlelit room. The walls were draped in black. Floor-level lanterns glowed red. At the center, a low table. 5 men in suits sat silently around it. At the head was Diddy, calm, smiling, holding a crystal goblet filled with some dark liquid. Then came the tray. A man in a white robe brought it out and placed it in front of Dwayne. It was a steel plate, covered. They lifted the lid, and what Dwayne saw made his voice crack. Pieces of raw monkey brain, still steaming, no seasoning. Just trembling flesh. He looked down, and then he looked at the jury again. Diddy said, "Everyone who's made it ate. Everyone who didn't vanished." Then he told the men to stare at Dwayne. "Let him feel the pressure," he said. Dwayne tried to laugh. He asked if it was a joke, a prank, some sick ritual, but no one laughed. No one moved. Then Diddy handed him a spoon, leaned in, and whispered, "Hollywood isn't about talent. It's about obedience." At that point, Dwayne broke down on the stand. He said, "I was scared, I was humiliated, and I was alone." Still shaking, he picked up the spoon. "Bit down. I don't remember the taste," he said. "Just the sound, the laughing, the chewing, then silence." He sat at that table for 30 minutes while they watched him finish. When it was over, Diddy stood and clapped. "Welcome to Level 2. Dwayne turned back to the jury. "A part of me died that night," he said. "Not because of what I ate, but because of what I gave up to eat it." The room was frozen in silence, still stunned by what Dwayne Johnson had just revealed. But as he continued, it became clear. The ritual he described was just the beginning. What followed wasn't just physical humiliation, but psychological. Warfare, a system designed to break you down and rebuild you into someone who would never question authority again. Dwayne's voice grew steadier, but his words were even more disturbing. "They started treating me differently," he said. "Not better, just differently, like I had crossed a threshold." He wasn't congratulated, he wasn't celebrated. Instead, he was monitored, invited to strange retreats, watched closely. Everything felt like another test to make sure he would stay quiet, to make sure he understood that silence was survival. He described one event in particular, a business retreat in a desert estate. He arrived expecting to meet with producers, studio heads, execs, but there were none. Just a handful of entertainers, some young, some established, all visibly uncomfortable. There were no windows in the rooms. Phones were confiscated. Music blasted on a loop for hours. Food arrived unpredictably. They were told to memorize bizarre scripts, chant affirmations about surrendering to the higher power of success, and to speak only when spoken to. "I thought maybe it was some kind of weird method acting training," he said. "But it wasn't. It was about breaking us down. It was about submission." He paused for a moment, taking a breath. "They wanted us to confuse fear with loyalty and pain with progress." Have you ever been in a situation where something seemed off, but you couldn't prove it, and everyone around you just stayed silent? Dwayne said, "That's exactly what this felt like," and he started to believe maybe he was imagining it all. But then, in the hallways, he'd lock eyes with others, actors, musicians, giving him the same haunted look. "We were trapped in a nightmare nobody talked about," he said. He started losing sleep, felt paranoid, was constantly questioning himself. He no longer felt like an actor chasing his dream. He felt like a product being molded. They didn't need chains, he said. They just needed silence, confusion and control. And then he dropped a term that left the courtroom whispering, the machine behind the curtain. According to Dwayne, after completing what he called the obedience trials, he was suddenly flooded with opportunities, scripts he hadn't auditioned for, roles he wasn't supposed to even be in the running for. People said, "Diddy vouched for you," he recalled. "And I didn't ask why, I was just grateful." But something was off. At one studio meeting, an exec didn't ask about his acting. Instead, they said, "We hear you're someone who plays the game. That's all that matters," he started to realize these weren't opportunities, they were assignments. He spoke of how Diddy's influence went far beyond music. It touched studios, agencies, even legal teams, and no one wanted to cross him. "One time, I skipped one of Diddy's after-hours gatherings," Dwayne said, "and a week later my agent told me my name was pulled from a major movie, just like that." That's when it hit him. Silence wasn't just expected, it was mandatory. And those around him, his managers, his lawyers, they knew. They never said Diddy's name unless it was followed by a compliment. I started feeling like a puppet, he said, not just controlled by studios, but by invisible alliances, favors, secrets, whispers. He looked out at the jury. You learn quickly that the people who really run Hollywood don't do it out in the open. Dwayne recalled one night when the illusion shattered completely. He had been invited to what was described as a private screening. But when he arrived at the luxury estate in the Hollywood Hills, it was something else entirely. There were security guards at every door. Guests were required to wear masks, not for fun, but for anonymity. Phones were taken. It didn't feel like a party, Dwayne said. It felt like an initiation, not mine, someone else's. He wandered the perimeter of the home, unease growing. What he saw next disturbed him to his core. I saw people I admired. Actors, musicians, directors, acting like they weren't themselves, like they were trying to prove something or hide something. And then he saw a young actor. He was crying in the hallway, Dwayne said, one clutching a drink, shaking. When Dwayne asked if he was okay, the actor said, "They told me this is what it takes." That was the breaking point. Dwayne left the event early. He didn't sleep that night. Not just because of what he'd seen, but because of what he finally understood. I wasn't invited because they liked me, he said. I was invited because I was useful, because I had proven I'd stay silent, he choked up. But seeing that kid, it reminded me who I was before all this. Before the fear, before the shame. He turned to the judge. That was the night I decided. If anyone ever asked me what I saw, I wouldn't lie. And now here he was, on the witness stand, keeping that promise. Every eye in the courtroom remained fixed on Dwayne Johnson, not because of his fame, but because of the weight in his voice, the raw honesty pouring from someone the world had only ever seen as invincible. He wasn't The Rock right now. He was just a man who had finally decided to stop protecting the people who never protected him. He took a slow breath and looked straight ahead. People always ask why we don't speak up, he said. Why actors, musicians, athletes, people with huge platforms don't call out what we see. I'll tell you why. Because it's terrifying. He looked down for a moment, then met the jury's eyes again. For a long time, I thought the best way to survive was to keep smiling, keep performing, keep my head down. Don't ruffle feathers, don't say names, just keep moving. Because if I ever spoke out, I thought I'd lose everything. He paused, his voice low, tired but firm. And it wasn't guilt that kept me quiet. It was fear. Fear of being blackballed, labeled difficult, unreliable. Dwayne said it wasn't always about direct threats. Sometimes it was watching someone disappear, watching roles dry up, phone calls stop, contracts vanish. He looked around the courtroom. I've seen it happen. I've watched people vanish from this industry. And they weren't crazy. They weren't unstable. They were just tired. Tired of pretending, tired of being owned. Then his tone shifted, more personal. He spoke about what that silence cost him, the anxiety, the isolation, the constant paranoia of who he could trust, what he could say, how far he could go before he stepped out of line. You feel like you're part of something you never agreed to, he said. But leaving, that means burning bridges that no one else will rebuild for you. He went quiet again, then finally admitted something that cut through the room. The worst part is that you start wondering if you were complicit just by surviving. He nodded slowly, eyes moving toward Cassie Ventura's legal team. Seeing her come forward changed everything. It reminded me that silence doesn't protect the right people. A ripple of energy moved through the room. He straightened up, not as the unbreakable persona the world knew, but as someone who had been shattered and rebuilt. There's this idea, he said, that once you make it, you're untouchable. That success means you're no longer vulnerable. But that's a lie. The higher you climb, the harder it is to speak, because the more you have, the more you fear losing it. He admitted that for years he hid what he experienced because it didn't fit the image he built, strength, positivity, resilience. But behind the scenes, I felt powerless. And then Something shifted in him. He said that as more survivors came forward across the industry, he started seeing his silence not as self-protection, but as betrayal. He recalled a moment that hit him harder than any other. A young fan came up to him and said, "You're the guy who never quits." That sentence stuck with me, he said, choking back emotion, because in some ways I had quit. I'd quit on my younger self, on my values, on the people still trapped in the system I escaped. He wiped away a tear, visibly shaken. "I'm not testifying to cancel anyone. I'm here because I've been quiet long enough, and I don't want anyone who looks up to me to think that silence is strength." He turned slowly until he was facing Diddy directly. "I want to say something to you, man to man." His voice didn't rise, he didn't shout, but the tension in the courtroom skyrocketed as he continued. "I've carried this for too long. You made me believe I had to sacrifice who I was in order to succeed, that I had to surrender my integrity just to be allowed in the room, and I believed you." He shook his head. But that wasn't power, that was fear, disguised as influence. He spoke not just for himself, but for everyone who had crossed paths with Diddy, everyone who was too afraid or too broken to speak. "I'm speaking for them now. For the people who were told they had no choice, who were told that dignity and dreams couldn't exist in the same space." Then came the line that left the gallery breathless. "You don't get to define my legacy." Not anymore. He stood up. And as he stepped down from the stand, his final words rang in the silence. "It ends here with the truth." The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It sat in stunned stillness because everyone watching understood. This wasn't just a celebrity speaking. It was a cultural shift. Dwayne Johnson didn't walk out like a victim. He didn't leave as a headline. He left as a man who had taken back his story, no longer afraid, no longer owned. As the bailiff gently guided Dwayne Johnson away from the witness stand, the air in the courtroom was so still, it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. You could hear a pin drop. People weren't blinking. Even the press sat stunned, fingers hovering above their keyboards, unsure how to process what they had just witnessed. But before Dwayne reached the double doors at the back of the courtroom, before he could step into the hallway where cameras and whispers would surely follow, he stopped. He didn't turn to look at Diddy. He didn't acknowledge the reporters craning for a better view. Instead, he turned back to face the room, his jaw tight, his voice low but clear. "I want to leave one more thing on record," he said. The gallery leaned in. Even the judge paused. "This story, my story, it's not just about me. It's not about fame or scandal or headlines. It's about the people who never got to sit in this chair. The ones who didn't survive long enough to speak. The ones still stuck behind the curtain, scared to death that no one will believe them." His eyes scanned the room. Not just the judge, not just the jury, but everyone. The culture, the silence, the system. For decades, Hollywood has been built on a lie. The myth that power justifies abuse, that success comes at a price you can't question. He inhaled sharply. But that myth is breaking. Not through revenge, not through rage, through truth. He took one more breath and let the weight of his words settle. "I stayed quiet because I thought if I spoke, I'd lose everything. But the truth is, I never had anything. Not really. If I didn't have myself." A soft murmur rippled through the courtroom. Support, awe, disbelief. Some lawyers looked around, unsure if they should object, but no one moved. Even the judge didn't interrupt. Dwayne nodded once, his expression solemn but unflinching. "To anyone out there watching this, wondering if it's safe to speak up, let this be your signal. The silence, it's over. We're not afraid anymore." And with that, he turned and walked out of the courtroom. No camera crew chased after him. No publicist swooped in with a press release. There were no flashing lights, no handlers spinning statements. Just a man who had finally reclaimed his voice, and for the first time in a very long time, the system that had once made him feel powerless had no idea how to shut him up. So what do you think, bro? Do you think Hollywood will ever truly change after testimonies like Dwayne's? Or will the machine find a way to bury even this moment? Let me know in the comments. And just so you know, I always read them and reply to as many as I can. Let's talk about this.